In 2009, a Florida woman named Marie Moore shot and killed her own son at a shooting range before taking her own life. She had left a note that said, "I'm so sorry. I had to send my son to heaven and myself to hell." She said that she could have only killed herself, but felt that she needed to, quote, save her son and the rest of the world. She wrote, "Hopefully when I die, there will be 1,000 years of peace." Two murderers can be seen in the background of Mark Jackson's Hoops basketball card from 1990. The Menendez brothers had murdered their parents and bought courtside tickets with their parents' money before they were convicted. In 1949, 12-year-old Charles Cohen hid inside of a closet while a mass murderer shot and killed his whole family. Nearly 70 years later, his granddaughter would survive the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting by hiding in a closet. Creepy Ask Reddits. What's the scariest story you've heard or told? I met a guy who was once hitchhiking around Australia with some friends. One of the guys said they were near his distant uncle's house whom he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member and the uncle offered them a place to stay. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to go to bed, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of backpacks and sleeping bags. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kit. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened. Afterwards, the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later, that man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhikers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me this story was 100% certain that he slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims. Remember this kid? He was saved by a dog when his parents left him in a garbage bin to die with his umbilical cord still attached. This is what he looks like now. Eitzaz Hassan was only 15 years old when he tackled a suicide bomber who tried entering his school. Sadly, he was killed but succeeded in saving hundreds of his fellow schoolmates. A Brazilian police officer was saved when his Nokia in his back pocket stopped a bullet that was fired at him. In 2015, a Texas father saved his son's life when doctors wrongly declared him brain dead and wanted to take him off life support. He barricaded himself in the hospital with a gun and had a 3-hour standoff with a SWAT team until his son squeezed his hand. The son went on to have a full recovery. Creepy Ask Reddits. What's the fastest you've seen a crowd go from excited to horrified? The entire assembly of students at the elementary school where astronaut/teacher Krista McAuliffe taught at. They watched the Space Shuttle Challenger explode seconds after takeoff, killing everyone on board including their teacher. WWE's Over the Edge in 1999. Owen Hart fell 70 feet to his death during the event, and the company inexplicably continued the show after he'd been taken to the hospital. The Station nightclub fire in Rhode Island 2003. The band Great White had just gotten on stage and the crowd was jamming out. Within 2 minutes, the whole place was up in flames due to faulty pyrotechnics, and everyone was screaming in agony. 100 people died, including the guitarist of the band, Ty Longley. Morbid facts that you didn't know about the Holocaust. During World War II, Pope Pius XII told the United States that he couldn't confirm reports that Germany was executing Jews. But in 2020, newly unsealed documents revealed that he was lying and knew all along that the Holocaust was happening. Homosexual males were identified in concentration camps by downward-facing pink triangles. Because of this identification, many of them were still considered criminals after their camps were freed. As a result, many of them were sent back to prison to serve out their terms. In the 1980s, a Holocaust denial group offered $50,000 to anyone who could prove that gas chambers were used at Auschwitz. They were forced by judge to pay that and an additional $40,000 to Auschwitz survivor Mel Mermelstein, who provided the proof. Creepy Ask Reddits. Forensic investigators of Reddit, what are some of the most disturbing and horrific cases you've worked on? I do fire investigation, and one that stuck with me was a girl started speaking to God at the dinner table. And then that night, she lit her room on fire with herself in it. She was likely mentally disturbed. I think about that one a lot. Gotta be the guy who stabbed his newborn and 4-year-old before slitting his throat and jabbing the knife into his chest. The worst part was his phone on the bed with numerous texts from his fiancée begging him not to harm the children. Had a paranoid schizophrenic who forced his elderly mother to eat rocks, and I mean a shitload of rocks, to the point where she died. He told police that he was feeding her rocks to weigh her down so that God couldn't take her yet. In 2012, a Jesus statue in India had water mysteriously dripping from its toes. Worshippers flocked from all over to collect and sometimes drink this miracle water. But soon enough, the source of the water was found to be a clogged toilet near the statue. After the Tiananmen Square massacre, the Chinese government sent bills to the families of the protesters for the cost of the bullets used to kill their loved ones. Over the last 10 years, about 10 Americans have been accidentally shot by dogs. 5 of them happened in Florida. Jeremy Rodale was a longevity expert who popularized the term organic food. While filming an interview for the Dick Cavett Show, he declared, "I've decided to live to be 100 and I've never felt better in my life." But minutes later, Rodale died of a heart attack while still being filmed. In 2015, an 18-year-old in Texas died of a snake bite. Sitting in his car, he allowed his pet king cobra to bite him multiple times on each arm. He was found dead from cardiac arrest and the snake was never found. The man who once had the longest beard in the world died after he stepped on it and broke his neck. Diana Ross, who sang "Ain't No Mountain High Enough," lost her ex-husband in a mountain climbing accident. In 1975, a man died from laughter while watching his favorite TV show, The Goodies. His widow later sent the program a letter thanking them for making her husband's final moments so pleasant. In Houston, Texas, a 19-year-old man named Rashad died while attempting to play Russian roulette. Apparently, he didn't know how the game works since he tried using a semi-automatic pistol instead of a revolver. Morbid facts that you didn't know about 9/11. For 40 years, there was a federal aviation rule that allowed commercial airline pilots to be armed with guns. But this policy was rescinded by the FAA just 2 months before 9/11. The company that owned the World Trade Center had scheduled a meeting on the 88th floor of the North Tower on the morning of 9/11. But they had to reschedule the night before because one person could not attend. The meeting was going to address what to do in the event of a terrorist attack. Disney had to edit and recreate the entire ending scene for Lilo and Stitch because of 9/11. They replaced a Boeing 747 with a red spaceship and changed the city buildings to a mountain landscape. Since 9/11, more than 40,000 people have been diagnosed with cancers and illnesses due to the debris of the fallen towers. More first responders have died from 9/11 related illnesses than on the actual day of 9/11. In 1978, 15-year-old Mary Vincent was hitchhiking in California when she was picked up by 56-year-old Larry Singleton. The man eventually knocked her out with a sledgehammer and sexually assaulted her that night. The next day, he cut off both her arms with a hatchet and threw her into a ditch to die. But Mary managed to pack her stumps with blood to stop the bleeding and spent all night crawling out. She eventually made it to the highway and started walking, naked and covered in blood. The first car that saw her sped away in horror. The second car was a couple on their honeymoon who picked her up and she survived. Singleton was sentenced to 14 years in prison but was released 6 years early due to good behavior. He would go on to murder a different woman named Roxanne Hayes a few years later. There's an area in Venezuela where lightning strikes 280 times per hour, 160 nights per year. It's called Relámpago del Catatumbo, aka the Everlasting Storm. The Indo-Hyas was a deer-like land mammal that was about the size of a raccoon. It's also the earliest known ancestor of the whale. This is how koalas are weighed, and it might just be the most adorable thing ever. While grizzly bears are large and terrifying, their size doesn't even compare to a polar bear's. When the sun is directly overhead, the landscape looks like a bad rendering of a video game. It's known as the subsolar point. A woman from Australia was awarded by PETA after rehabilitating a huntsman spider that only had 2 of its legs left. She fed it water and small cockroaches for a month until it grew all of its legs back. Alexander I of Yugoslavia refused to make a public appearance on a Tuesday after 3 of his family members died on a Tuesday. After finally being forced to appear on a Tuesday, he was promptly assassinated. In 2010, an MI6 agent was found naked and dead inside of a padlocked bag in his London home. Police concluded that he accidentally locked himself in the bag and died as a result. In 2001, a man was shot dead while testing out a bulletproof potion that he received from a witch doctor. After applying the potion for 2 weeks, he asked a fellow villager to shoot him so that he could test it out. Turns out the potion was just cherry Kool-Aid and the man died instantly. Creepy Ask Reddits. What is the scariest story you know that is 100% true? In my town in the early 90s, there was a notorious killer who had all of British Columbia on watch. My wife's mother had been home alone while her husband was in England for work. She was in her laundry room when a man walked up her basement, completely scaring her. She freaked out and said, "What the hell are you doing here?" He said he was friends with her husband and was just coming to see if he was here. Apparently he told him he could just walk in, which she knew was bullshit. She was smart enough to tell him that he was just at the store and would be back any minute. He said he would wait outside for him, and as soon as he left, she called the police. But he was long gone by the time they got there. 2 weeks later, the killer was caught. His mugshot was put on TV, and it was the guy in her house. Edit, the guy's name was Terry Driver. Morbid facts that you didn't know about the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Godzilla was originally created to symbolize the atomic bombings and a victim of them. He's covered in keloid scars to depict the brutal body scars of survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Survivors who suffered the most from the bombings were in such horrific condition that people called them ant-walking alligators. They were described to be faceless with their heads transformed into blackened alligator hides with red holes indicating mouths. Just months after the bombings, Kix cereal offered an atomic bomb-shaped ring in exchange for a box top and 15 cents. While the atomic bombings were devastating, the most destructive bombing raid in world history actually took place a few months earlier. The US Army used incendiary bombs to light a giant flaming X over the center of Tokyo. It left at least 100,000 civilians dead and 1 million more homeless. In 1903, Topsy the elephant was executed by poisoning, strangulation, and electrocution. A 74-second video of the electrocution was recorded and preserved by Thomas Edison. It may have been the first time ever that death was captured in a motion picture film. In 1854, a 13-year-old boy died in San Francisco after a circus clown swung him around by the heels. A Frenchman named Tarare was famous in the 1700s for his endless appetite. He was reported to have eaten live snakes, cats, lizards, and puppies. In one case, he ate a meal intended for 15 people in a single sitting. While being treated in a hospital for his condition, he was caught trying to drink other patients' blood and eat corpses from the morgue. After being suspected of eating a toddler, he was ejected from the hospital. These are some weird facts that you didn't know about sloths. Sloths poop only once per week, during which they lose about a third of their body weight. It's such a dangerous task for them that about 50% of sloth deaths happen while they're dropping a deuce. Sloths digest food using fermentation, so if they're fed too many fruits, they can die from alcohol poisoning. Sloths are great swimmers and can swim 3 times faster than they can walk on land. Because of their ability to slow down their heart rate, they can also hold their breath for more than 40 minutes. A sloth's claws work opposite to a human hand. Their natural position is a tight, strong grip, and they have to exert effort to open their claws. This is why sloths don't fall out of trees when they're asleep. And finally, you should always whisper when you're around a sloth because loud noises can cause them stress and lead to a heart attack. Here are some morbid facts that you didn't know about the American Civil War. During the Civil War, twice as many soldiers died from diseases than battle injuries. Dysentery and chronic diarrhea were so prevalent that there was an honor code among soldiers to never shoot a man while he's pooping. This is a photo comparison of Abraham Lincoln before and after the war. Many Cherokee Indians sided and fought with the Confederacy during the Civil War. This was because many of them were black slave owners themselves and they still resented the Union for the Trail of Tears. Confederate soldier W.V. Meadows was shot in the eye during the Battle of Vicksburg. He survived and 58 years later he coughed the bullet out of his mouth. Until the Civil War, Robert E. Lee owned a plantation across the river from Washington, D.C. Once the Union Army captured the land, they started burying Union soldiers there to spite Lee. Today that property is known as Arlington Cemetery. These morbid facts might make you think twice about visiting a zoo. The 1889 World's Fair in Paris was where the Eiffel Tower was officially unveiled. That same fair also had a Negro zoo with 400 black people in cages as one of the attractions. Most white tigers in zoos are white because of forced inbreeding, and they're almost always born with genetic birth defects. A chimpanzee named Santino collected stones and stockpiled them to throw at passing visitors. This was the first ever observed case of an animal planning a premeditated attack. In 1993, a military jet flew over a zoo in Sweden and caused great stress to the animals. 23 baby animals were eaten by their parents as a protective response. There's a condition called zoochosis that causes repeated pacing, vomiting, and even self-mutilation. These behaviors are not seen anywhere in the wild and are only displayed because of captivity. In 2001, Ashton Kutcher had a girlfriend who was murdered by a serial killer after being stabbed 35 times in her own home. Kutcher would end up testifying in the trial of the Hollywood Ripper, who would later confess to murdering at least 10 women. A Minnesota burglar was caught after logging onto his own Facebook account on a computer in the house that he was robbing. The homeowner returned to find the perpetrator's account still logged in. In 2016, a Florida man threw an alligator through a Wendy's window and was charged with assault with a deadly weapon. In 2015, 2 daycare employees in New Jersey were arrested for running a toddler fight club. A dozen boys and girls aged 4 to 6 were encouraged to shove and strike each other in 1v1 or melee-style brawls. The 2 women were sentenced to 3 years probation for, quote, creating a recipe for disaster. There's a Mickey Mouse comic strip from 1930 in which Minnie leaves him for another mouse. In response, Mickey then attempts several ways to commit suicide. In 1966, former U.S. Marine Charles Whitman suddenly went crazy and killed 16 people, including his mother and wife. Prior to the shooting, Whitman had seen several doctors due to the sudden onset of irrational thoughts. After his death, an autopsy concluded that a brain tumor was pressing against his amygdala, likely contributing to his sudden horrific behavior. In 1991, Patricia Stallings was sentenced to life in prison for poisoning her child with antifreeze. She then gave birth to a second child while in prison, who was given to a foster care. But he eventually became sick with the same symptoms as the first child, indicating a rare metabolic disorder, not poisoning. This proved her innocence and she was later released. In a Mexican prison in 2020, 2 rival drug cartels decided to have a friendly soccer match. Things must have gotten out of hand pretty quickly since the match ended with 16 people dead. In 1975, it was revealed that the CIA had developed a heart attack gun that fired a dart of frozen water and shellfish toxin. Once inside the body, it would melt, leaving only a small red mark on the victim. The official cause of death would always be a heart attack. Here are some morbid facts that you didn't know about the JFK assassination. A few weeks before JFK was killed, 2 military code operators intercepted messages about a planned assassination attempt. But instead of being taken seriously, the 2 men were admitted to mental asylums. Lee Harvey Oswald's widow is still living in Texas today and still believes that her husband was innocent. JFK's brain has been missing from the National Archives for more than 50 years. The car in which JFK was assassinated was cleaned up and repurposed back into rotation. It served as the presidential limo for Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter following JFK's death. After the president was assassinated, his wife Jackie refused to remove the blood-stained pink suit she wore that day. She even wore it when LBJ was sworn in as president, saying, quote, "I want them to see what they've done to Jack." During an interview with Stephen Hawking, the cameraman yanked out a cable that set off an alarm and caused Hawking to slump forward. Worried they had killed him, everyone rushed over to find Hawking laughing at his own joke. The alarm was from an office computer losing power. This guy got a tattoo of his daughter's last drawing before she passed away. As of 2006, about 75% of Chinese people didn't know that sharks were killed to make shark fin soup. But now more than 90% of China supports a nationwide ban thanks to activism efforts by people like Yao Ming. Trish Vickers was a blind author who wrote 26 pages of her first novel without realizing that her pen had run out of ink. But local police used forensic equipment to decipher the missing words, and the book was published on the day of her death. These are some of the most ironic deaths of all time. Eugene Azarinsky was the researcher who discovered REM sleep, aka dreaming. In 1998, he died in a car crash after falling asleep at the wheel. Jeremy Moody was a guest at a party for lifeguards who were celebrating going an entire season without anyone drowning. But at the end of the party, with over 100 lifeguards present, Jeremy's body was found at the bottom of the pool. A Nebraska man named Derek Keeper was an anti-seatbelt advocate who wrote about why seatbelt laws shouldn't be a thing. 4 months later, he died in a car accident after not wearing a seatbelt, while his two friends who were wearing seatbelts survived. In 2011, a 49-year-old Russian woman was wrongly declared dead by doctors. At her own funeral, she suddenly woke up but was so horrified that she suffered a heart attack and died for real. A group of blue dogs was recently spotted in Russia near an abandoned chemical factory. It's believed they were exposed to chemicals used to make plexiglass, but doctors say they appear to be in good health. Despite its reputation for spiders, nobody has died from a confirmed spider bite in Australia since 1979. But many deaths have occurred due to people being surprised by them, such as while driving. When mating, flatworms engage in violent penis fencing to determine who will be the father. The winner who stabs the other with its pecker remains a male while the other becomes a female. Immediately after banging, a female praying mantis will rotate her head 180 degrees and eat the head of the male. Therefore, the male has an extra brain in its rear, so it can continue mating without a head. Actor Jake Lloyd played young Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. But at the age of 12, he retired from acting due to bullying and destroyed all of his Star Wars memorabilia. Years later, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia after being involved in a high-speed car chase with police. When Alam Khan was only 12 years old, he watched his own father get murdered by a family friend. But he avenged his father's death by killing the murderer in a revenge attack that he had planned for 12 years. He ended up cutting the man into 12 pieces, one for each year that he had to wait. In 2004, a suicidal teenager in Manchester made a fake online account to convince his best friend to murder him. After surviving the attack, he became the first person in UK history to be charged with inciting their own murder. In 2005, Eric Torpy was sentenced to 30 years in prison for shooting with intent to kill. But as per his request, his sentence was extended to 33 years to match Larry Bird's jersey number. Wealthy Chinese people have been known to hire body doubles to get prosecuted for their crimes. It's such a common practice that there's even a term for it called ding zoi, aka substitute criminal. By definition, an outlaw is a criminal who has been sentenced to be outside the protection of the law. He has no right to trial and can be killed or prosecuted by anyone. 6 Georgia inmates out on work detail saved a deputy sheriff who collapsed unconscious. They could have taken his gun and fled with the work van, but instead used his phone to call 911. The sheriff's office gave the inmates a pizza party and recommended reduced sentences. Last year, a fan drove 3 hours to deliver a much-needed dose of insulin to rapper Boozy Badass. She refused to accept any payment and instead just wanted a photo with him. On her way home, she stopped at a gas station, bought a scratch-off ticket, and won $10,000. 9 out of 10 people who are stopped from committing suicide don't end up killing themselves at a later date. A team of firefighters from Wiltshire, England saved a group of piglets from a barn fire. 6 months later, the farmer sent them sausages made from the piglets as a thank you gift. The Iron Sheik planned on killing the man who murdered his daughter with a razor blade he was hiding in his mouth during the trial. But his family talked him out of it, and instead, as tribute to his daughter, he quit drugs and got his life back on track. During World War I and II, fingers were used to reconstruct noses. The patients got a new nose but lost a finger in return. A Japanese soldier named Hiru Onada was stranded on an island for 30 years without knowing that World War II had ended. His commander had to travel to the island to personally dismiss him in 1974. Upon returning home, he became a national hero. More planes were destroyed during World War II than the number of planes that exist in the entire world today. Some warships used to be painted like optical illusions. The purpose of this dazzle camouflage was not to conceal a ship, but rather to mislead the enemy by making the ship's speed and range more difficult to estimate, much to the same effect as patterns seen on zebras, jaguars, and giraffes. While getting into character for the Jobs movie, Ashton Kutcher tried Steve Jobs' diet, but he ended up in a hospital because it messed with his pancreas levels. It's likely no coincidence that Steve Jobs died from pancreatic cancer. Albert Einstein's last words were lost forever because he said them in German, which the nurse attending to him did not speak. The disclaimer of no animals were harmed during the making of this film isn't always true. It can be put on movies even if animals died during the production, as long as cameras weren't rolling at the time. The Heart Attack Grill is a restaurant in Las Vegas where people weighing over 350 pounds can eat for free. 3 people have died while eating there, and the only vegan option on the menu is cigarettes. While first filming Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe was allergic to his own glasses. Turns out he had a nickel allergy and suffered for weeks with mysterious bumps around his eyes. The nickel glasses were eventually replaced with hypoallergenic specs. The Make-A-Wish Foundation granted a child the chance to visit the set of Thor Ragnarok. In the movie, when Thor sees Hulk enter the arena, it was the child's idea for Thor to say he's a friend from work. Most of the people that Christopher Walken interacted with as a child were non-native speakers, including his father. He developed his halting speaking style by watching other people hesitate to think of the right English word. The US government was in full support of the movie Independence Day, offering real military uniforms and even jets. That was only until the filmmakers refused to remove Area 51 from the movie, at which point the government withdrew all support. In proportion to body weight, koalas have one of the smallest brains of any mammal. They're so dumb that when presented with leaves on a flat surface instead of on branches, they are unable to recognize them as food and will not eat them. Dogs get sprayed by skunks so often because skunks raise their tails as a warning. Dogs see this as "come smell my butt," which is the exact opposite message of what the skunk is trying to send. In Germany, it is illegal to kill any vertebrate animal without proper reason. Because of this, all German animal shelters are no-kill. In the 1980s, Ken the orangutan escaped from his enclosure at the San Diego Zoo multiple times. His apparent goals were visiting other animals, taking photos with tourists, and throwing rocks at his orangutan rival. In her Firefox search history, Casey Anthony had foolproof suffocation methods from the day before her daughter died. But police overlooked this evidence because they only checked her search history from Internet Explorer. Throughout his life, Ernest Hemingway survived malaria, anthrax, pneumonia, dysentery, skin cancer, diabetes, hepatitis, a ruptured kidney, spleen, and liver, a crushed vertebrae, and a fractured skull. He also survived 2 separate plane crashes in a 2-day span while on an African safari. In 2013, a French businessman died of a heart attack while having an affair with a stranger during a company trip. A French court ruled that this was an industrial accident and that his wife and family were entitled to compensation. Johnny Depp's daughter nearly died from an E. coli infection and had an extended hospital stay. To thank the hospital, Johnny dressed up as Jack Sparrow and read stories to children for 4 hours. Before it came out in theaters, it was a 10-year-old girl's dying wish to see the movie Up. So a rep from Pixar flew to her home with a DVD copy, and she died 7 hours after watching the movie. In 2011, a man suffered a heart attack while shopping at a grocery store in Minnesota. Luckily, 20 people took turns performing CPR on him for more than 90 minutes until paramedics arrived. During the California Tubbs fire in 2017, a dog named Odin refused to leave his flock of goats behind while his owners fled to safety. Days later, the owners returned to their decimated property to miraculously find Odin and all of the goats still alive. These are some of the craziest world records that were set by accident. In 1945, a U.S. military plane accidentally crashed into the Empire State Building due to heavy fog. Among other damages, the plane severed the cables of an elevator while a woman was still inside. But Betty Oliver survived the 75-story plunge and still holds the record for the longest survived elevator fall. In 2013, a college kid at UVA nearly died after drinking an entire quart of soy sauce on a dare. He now holds the record for the highest blood sodium level ever recorded without brain damage. In 1972, flight attendant Vesna Volovich survived a 33,000-foot fall after an aircraft explosion. She now holds the Guinness World Record for the highest survived free fall without a parachute. Here are some morbid facts about Charles Manson. When Charles was born, his mother didn't even bother giving him a name. When doctors handed her the paper, she wrote no name, and Manson's birth certificate read no name Maddox until his death. After his mother spent 3 years in prison, she returned home and gave Charles a hug for the first and only time. Manson would later say that this hug was his only happy memory from his childhood. By the time he turned 32, Manson had spent nearly half his life behind bars. When he was released from prison in 1967, he requested to stay because he was afraid of adjusting to the outside world, as the prison had become his true home. Manson often gave his followers instructions on how to make the murders look like they were done by black people. When they murdered Gary Hinman in 1969, they drew a Black Panther paw on the wall using his blood. Manson apparently believed that this would spark an apocalyptic race war. This woman's husband and son died in a car crash while driving home from an Italian soccer match. She was invited to the next game to discover that all the players and staff were wearing shirts to honor them. In 2017, a 9 weeks pregnant Brazilian woman suffered a stroke and was declared legally dead. Although doctors said the babies had no hope for survival, the brain-dead woman was kept alive for 123 days before delivering a pair of healthy twins. You may remember when Bat Kid Miles Scott saved the city of San Francisco while battling leukemia in 2013. That same boy is now cancer-free. After a 2018 boating accident in Nigeria, a man named Blankson sacrificed his life to save 13 people. By the 14th trip, he was completely exhausted and ended up drowning, but he was the only fatality of the accident. The death of Metallica singer James Hetfield's mom inspired him to write the song The God That Failed. She died when he was 16 due to Christian beliefs influencing her to reject cancer treatment. In 1999, a waitress was tipped a lottery ticket and won $10 million. She was then sued by her colleagues for their share. Afterwards, she was sued by the man who tipped her the ticket. Then she was kidnapped by her ex-husband and ended up shooting him in the chest. Lastly, she went to court against the IRS for more than a decade before finally winning. In 1825, painter Samuel Morse received a letter which read that his wife was sick. The next day, he received a new letter which read that she had died. 2 days later, he went to see his wife one last time only to discover she had already been buried. Distraught over the slowness of long-distance communication, he invented the Morse code. In 1977, Bob Marley was diagnosed with skin cancer on his toe and was told that having it amputated would stop the spread. But he refused the surgery since his Rastafarian religion saw amputation as a sin. By summer of 1980, the cancer had metastasized throughout Marley's entire body, and he died soon afterwards. When 2-year-old Rosalia Lombardo died from the Spanish flu in 1920, her grieving father insisted on her being preserved. Known as the Sleeping Beauty, she was one of the last to be buried in Sicily's Capuchin catacombs. This photo was taken in 1982, 62 years after she died. In the year 2000, a partially paralyzed old man was in his outhouse when the floor suddenly collapsed. He fell through and was immediately surrounded by excrement, spiders, maggots, and rats. He was stuck for more than 3 days until his mailman thankfully found him. These are some morbid facts that you didn't know about the Challenger explosion. NASA originally planned on sending Big Bird on the Challenger to get children interested in space travel. But the Big Bird suit was too big, so they ended up sending teacher Krista McAuliffe instead. Shortly after takeoff, the Challenger exploded while millions were watching live on CNN, including McAuliffe's entire school. One of the main engineers behind the rocket revealed that NASA ignored his warnings against launching in cold weather. The night before the launch, he told his wife, quote, "It's going to blow up." He was one of 5 engineers who voiced their concerns to NASA prior to the launch. Despite initial reports by NASA, the astronauts likely didn't die immediately from the blast. They might have spent the last 3 minutes of their lives consciously plummeting to Earth at 200 miles an hour. In 1981, a Turkish man shot Pope John Paul II 4 times but didn't kill him. After the Pope recovered, he visited the assassin in prison and gave him his forgiveness. The assassin was soon pardoned at the Pope's request, and 33 years after his crime, he visited Vatican City and laid flowers on the Pope's tomb. Ancient Romans were known to build tombs for their dogs and even gave them epitaphs to remember them by. One such inscription read, "I am in tears while carrying you to your last resting place, as much as I rejoiced when bringing you home with my own hands 15 years ago." Liviu Librescu was a Holocaust survivor who eventually became a professor at Virginia Tech. During the Virginia Tech shooting, he held the door of his classroom, sacrificing his life to save 22 of his 23 students while the shooter continuously shot through the door. In 1996, a man from Texas was bitten by the highly venomous coral snake. But instead of panicking, he killed the snake by biting off its head before using the snake's decapitated body as a tourniquet. Venezuelan serial killer Duranhel Vargas confessed to killing and eating at least 10 individuals, but he claimed he never ate fat people because he thought they had too much cholesterol. A British bomb detection dog named Theo died from stress a few hours after watching his handler get shot. The pair had set a record for bomb detection, and the dog was posthumously awarded an honor equivalent to the Victorian Cross. In 2019, a Spanish woman gave her neighbor a box full of sex toys to hold on to. 6 months later, the neighbor noticed a horrible stench coming from the box. She finally opened it and found a decomposing severed head. It was the head of the original woman's husband.